At first, you think it's a coincidence. The messages slow down. The invitations become less frequent. The energy shifts. You tell yourself everyone is just busy. But something inside you knows. The dynamic has changed. And if you're honest, you change first. You stopped over-explaining yourself. You stopped responding immediately. You stopped trying to be impressive, agreeable, or constantly available. You became calmer, more contained, more self-sufficient. And strangely, the attention decreased. This is one of the most confusing stages of growth, because we are told that confidence attracts, that self-assurance draws people in, and often it does, but not always the same people. Carl Jung believed that relationships are often built on unconscious exchanges, projections, insecurities, unspoken needs. If you were unconsciously seeking validation, others unconsciously responded to that need. The more you needed reassurance, the more they felt important giving it. The more you overgave, the more they received. The more you explained yourself, the more they evaluated you. These dynamics can feel like closeness, but they are often structured around insecurity. Let's make this real. Imagine you used to send long messages explaining your feelings. You clarified everything. You checked in constantly. You sought reassurance subtly. People engaged. They replied with depth, with intensity. There was emotional volume. Now, you don't feel the need to do that. You respond simply. You say what you mean. You don't over-justify. And the conversation feels shorter, less charged. You might wonder, did I become less interesting? Or something more painful? Did they only care when I was insecure? It's not always that simple. But here is something honest. Some dynamics are fueled by imbalance. If you were the one constantly reaching, the other person felt pursued. If you were constantly available, they felt prioritized. If you were always adjusting, they felt stable. When you stop chasing validation, the imbalance corrects. And when imbalance corrects, certain dynamics dissolve. You may notice this especially in friendships. If you were the emotional caretaker, people came to you often. You listened, you soothed, you reassured. It gave you purpose. But it also drained you. As you grow, you begin setting subtle boundaries. You don't respond immediately. You don't solve every problem. You don't absorb every emotion. And suddenly, some people stop coming as frequently, not because they hate you, but because the dynamic changed. You are no longer fulfilling the same psychological role. This can feel like rejection, but sometimes it is restructuring. There is a difference between connection and validation exchange. Validation exchange feels intense. You say something self-critical. They reassure you. They doubt themselves. You uplift them. Back and forth. It feels intimate, but it is often built on mutual insecurity. As self-awareness increases, your need for that exchange decreases. You no longer fish for compliments. You no longer exaggerate vulnerability to secure attention. You no longer overperform competence to receive admiration. You simply exist. And existing without performance can feel quieter. Quieter often means fewer reactions. Fewer reactions can feel like less value. If you built part of your identity on being needed, admired, or constantly engaged, the reduction in attention feels destabilizing. You might ask yourself, was I only liked because I was insecure? Did they only care when I was overgiving? Those questions hurt, but they also reveal something deeper. Some relationships are structured around who you were struggling to be, not who you are becoming. When you were chasing validation, you were energetically reaching outward. Reaching creates movement. Movement attracts response. When you stop reaching, you become still, and stillness does not provoke the same urgency. Stillness feels grounded, but grounded does not always stimulate. This is especially noticeable in romantic dynamics. If you once anxiously checked for signs of interest, the other person may have felt powerful. If you were slightly uncertain, they may have felt needed. But once you become secure, once you no longer chase, the dynamic levels out. And not everyone is comfortable with level ground. Some people are unconsciously drawn to imbalance. They feel chemistry in pursuit. They feel connection in instability. When instability disappears, their interest may shift. That does not mean your stability is wrong. It means the connection was partially fueled by insecurity. Jung wrote about projection shaping attraction. We are drawn to people who activate unconscious parts of us. If someone was drawn to your insecurity because it activated a desire to feel needed or superior, your growth will disrupt that pattern. Growth is disruptive, especially to dynamics built on imbalance. There is another subtle layer. When you stop chasing validation, you become less predictable. Earlier, people could anticipate your responses. They knew you would explain. They knew you would adjust. They knew you would reach out. Now, you don't operate from that script. And unpredictability at the level of validation exchange can feel destabilizing to others. So they withdraw, not always consciously, but energetically. And you are left wondering, did I lose them? Maybe. Or maybe you lost a version of the relationship that required you to be smaller. There's a quiet grief in this stage, because part of you misses the attention, misses the intensity, misses a constant interaction. Even if it was exhausting, attention feels good. It confirms existence. It confirms value. But attention that depends on insecurity is unstable. When insecurity fades, attention recalibrates. This recalibration can feel lonely because the volume decreases before depth increases. You may go through a period where fewer people engage intensely, fewer messages, fewer dramatic conversations, fewer emotional highs, and you might question your growth. Was I better before? Should I go back to being more expressive? But ask yourself, were you expressive, or were you seeking reassurance? Were you caring, or were you afraid of being abandoned? Were you available, or were you afraid of being irrelevant? These questions are uncomfortable, but they bring clarity. When you stop chasing validation, you stop feeding certain dynamics. Some people adjust. Some don't. An initial effect feels like loss, but it may be refinement. You are not becoming less valuable. You are becoming less dependent on external confirmation. And when dependence decreases, attention patterns shift. This is not punishment. It is restructuring. The real question is, can you tolerate reduced attention without returning to old patterns? Can you remain grounded when the noise fades? Because if you can, something deeper begins forming. Connection that is not built on insecurity. Interest that is not fueled by imbalance. Respect that does not require performance. But before that stabilizes, there is often a quiet season. A season where you learn to stand without applause. And that season tests whether your growth was for validation or for alignment. The hardest realization isn't that attention decreased. It's understanding why. When you stop chasing validation, you don't just change your behavior. You change the psychological contract. And not every relationship survives that shift. There's something uncomfortable about admitting this. Some connections were not built on mutual wholeness. They were built on complementary insecurities. You needed reassurance. They needed to feel needed. You over-explained. They evaluated. You pursued. They withdrew. That imbalance created tension. And tension created energy. Energy feels like connection. But connection built on imbalance requires constant maintenance. The moment one person stabilizes, the system destabilizes. Carl Jung spoke about projection shaping relationships. If someone projected power onto you because you seemed unsure, your insecurity fed their sense of control. If someone projected worth onto you because you admired them excessively, your validation fed their ego. When you become internally grounded, projection has less fuel. And without fuel, certain dynamics collapse. This can feel deeply personal. You might think, they liked me more when I was insecure. And in some cases, that may be true. But not because you were more lovable. Because you were more predictable within the dynamic. Predictability in imbalance is comforting. If you always responded instantly, they knew where they stood. If you always sought reassurance, they knew their role. If you always overgave, they felt central. When you stop doing those things, the script disappears. And people who are attached to the script feel unsettled. Let's ground this. Imagine you used a double text when someone didn't respond. You needed confirmation. Now, You send one message and move on. You don't spiral. You don't chase. You don't perform anxiety. The other person notices. They may not consciously think about it, but they feel the shift. The emotional urgency is gone. And urgency often fuels attraction. Without urgency, the dynamic feels calmer. Calm can be misinterpreted as disinterest or lack of spark. But what actually disappeared was imbalance. There is another subtle layer. When you stop chasing validation, you stop performing. You stop tailoring yourself to what you think will be approved. You stop exaggerating parts of your personality to maintain attention. You become more neutral, more honest, more self-contained. But performance is stimulating. Authenticity is quieter. If someone was unconsciously drawn to your performance, your eagerness, your emotional expressiveness, your constant availability, your neutrality may feel less exciting to them. That does not mean you are less interesting. It means you are less dependent. Dependency creates emotional spikes. Independence creates stability. And stability is less dramatic. Many people unconsciously bond through shared insecurity. Two people validating each other constantly. Two people rescuing each other repeatedly. Two people chasing and withdrawing in cycles. When one person exits that cycle, the other may feel disoriented. They may interpret your groundedness as distance. They may say, "You've changed," and you have. You are no longer relating from fear of losing them. You are relating from self-respect. Self-respect does not chase. It does not beg. It does not overcompensate. It shows up and observes. That observation can feel intimidating to someone who is comfortable with your anxiety. There is grief here, because you may realize that some people were attached to the version of you that was uncertain, the version that sought approval, the version that needed them to feel okay. That realization hurts. It can feel like betrayal, but it is not always malicious. Most of these dynamics are unconscious. People are drawn to patterns that validate their own insecurities. If someone felt powerful because you sought their reassurance, your stability removes that power dynamic. If someone felt admired because you idealize them, your grounded perception removes that pedestal. Pedestals create intensity. Equality creates calm. Not everyone knows how to operate in calm. Some people need imbalance to feel connection. When imbalance disappears, interest may fade. This does not mean you are less lovable. It means you are no longer participating in unconscious exchanges. And unconscious exchanges are often the glue of unstable relationships. There is also something you must confront honestly. Part of you may miss the attention, even if it was unhealthy, even if it was inconsistent. Attention feels like proof that you matter, proof that you are wanted. When the volume decreases, insecurity may whisper, "See? You were more valuable before." But value built on insecurity is conditional. It requires constant performance. True value remains even when you are quiet. The test during the stage is not whether others adjust. It is whether you regress. Will you return to over-explaining to restore attention? Will you overgive to reignite intensity? Will you subtly shrink to feel pursued again? Or will you tolerate the temporary quiet? Growth often includes a social detox, not dramatic isolation, but reduction. Reduction in reactive conversations, reduction in validation loops, reduction in emotionally charged exchanges. That reduction can feel like social withdrawal, but it is recalibration. You are shifting from relationships built on insecurity to relationships built on alignment. Alignment is slower to form. It does not ignite immediately. It builds gradually. And in the space between old dynamics fading and new ones forming, there is silence. Silence can feel like rejection. But sometimes it is refinement. Refinement removes what depended on imbalance. What remains, or what arrives later, is steadier. Ask yourself something uncomfortable but clarifying. If this person only engaged intensely when I was insecure, is that the connection I truly want? If their interest declines when I am grounded, what does that reveal about the foundation? These questions are not meant to create bitterness. They are meant to create awareness. You are not being punished for becoming secure. You are disrupting patterns. Patterns rarely dissolve quietly. They fade when one participant stops feeding them. Right now, you are learning whether attention was connection or compensation. And that learning phase feels lonely before it feels liberating. Stay grounded. Let the dynamics reveal themselves. Because the goal was never to keep everyone interested. The goal was to stop losing yourself to stay interesting. There comes a quiet moment in this process where you realize something important. The reduction in attention is not the real problem. The real challenge is tolerating it. When you stop chasing validation, the world feels quieter. Fewer dramatic conversations. Fewer emotionally intense exchanges. Fewer moments where someone urgently reassures you. And in that quiet, your old instincts may resurface. You may feel the urge to post something just to provoke reaction, to send a message you don't really need to send, to exaggerate vulnerability, so someone leans in again. That urge is not weakness. It is habit. Your nervous system was accustomed to external confirmation. Now it must learn stability without constant feedback. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires withdrawing projections and reclaiming psychic energy. When you stop projecting your worth outward, you begin generating it internally. But internal generation is subtle. It does not produce applause. It produces coherence. Coherence feels calm, and calm can feel invisible. Here is the deeper truth. If someone loses interest because you are no longer insecure, they were interacting with your insecurity more than your essence. If someone feels less connected when you stop overgiving, they were attached to the imbalance. That realization can sting, because it reveals that not all attention was rooted in depth, but it also reveals something empowering. You no longer need to distort yourself to maintain connection. Let's bring this into real life. You stop replying instantly. You take time before responding. You stop explaining every decision. You say no without over-justifying. At first, you might notice fewer invitations, less pursuit, less intensity. But what you may also notice, if you look closely, is something new. You feel less anxious, less pressured, less hyper-aware of how you are perceived. That internal shift is significant. Earlier, your sense of stability depended on how others reacted. Now, your stability depends on alignment. Alignment is quieter than validation, but it is steadier. There is a stage in growth where you must be willing to be misunderstood, not aggressively, not rebelliously, but calmly. You no longer rush to correct every misinterpretation. You no longer seek immediate reassurance. You let your actions speak consistently over time. This can feel risky, because without constant validation, insecurity whispers, what if they forget about me? What if I become irrelevant? But relevance built on insecurity is fragile. Relevance built on authenticity is durable. You may also begin noticing something subtle. The people who remain engaged with you now relate differently. Conversations are less dramatic, less urgent, but more grounded. There is less emotional volatility, more mutual respect, less chasing, more reciprocity. This is the shift from validation-based connection to alignment-based connection. Alignment does not create fireworks. It creates steadiness, and steadiness builds trust. There may be a transitional period where your social world feels smaller, fewer intense interactions, fewer adrenaline spikes. That contraction can feel like loss, but contraction often precedes refinement. You are no longer available for every dynamic, only the ones that respect your boundaries. And boundaries reduce volume, but increase quality. The real work in this stage is internal. When attention decreases, do you collapse? Or do you remain centered? When someone pulls back because you stopped overgiving, do you chase? Or do you observe? When silence replaces noise, do you panic? Or do you breathe? Each time you choose groundedness over performance, you strengthen self-trust. Self-trust becomes a new foundation. Instead of asking, do they still like me? You begin asking, do I still respect myself? That shift changes everything. Because validation seeking asks for approval. Self-respect asks for alignment. If a relationship only survives when you are anxious, over-explaining, or shrinking, that relationship required your instability, and you are no longer willing to be unstable for attention. This does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming whole. Whole people still care. They still show up. They still invest. But they do not beg. They do not overperform. They do not collapse when attention fluctuates. Over time, something stabilizes. You realize that the quiet is not rejection. It is filtration. The noise that depended on insecurity fades. What remains is slower, more deliberate, less dramatic, but more real. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Becoming who you truly are means losing interest from people who preferred who you pretended to be. That loss is not punishment. It is clarity. You are no longer performing for connection. You are connecting from integrity. Integrity may not attract everyone, but it attracts what fits. And fitting feels different from being chased. It feels mutual. It feels calm. It feels stable. If you are in this stage, stay steady. Let the noise reduce. Let the dynamics reveal themselves. Do not rush to refill the silence with old patterns, because in that silence, something important is forming, a sense of worth that does not fluctuate with attention, a presence that does not depend on applause, a connection to yourself that remains, whether others lean in or pull away. And once that stabilizes, you will no longer fear losing interest, because you will no longer need it to feel valuable. When you stop chasing validation, the world can feel quieter. Fewer intense reactions, fewer urgent messages, fewer moments of dramatic reassurance. And at first, that quiet can feel like loss. But not all loss is rejection. Sometimes it is refinement. Carl Jung understood that relationships often form around unconscious patterns. When you withdraw the need for validation, those patterns lose fuel. Some connections deepen. Others dissolve. If someone loses interest when you become secure, they were likely attached to your insecurity, not your essence. That realization may hurt, but it is clarifying. You are no longer performing to be chosen. You are no longer overgiving to stay relevant. You are no longer shrinking to keep attention. You are standing still. And standing still can feel invisible before it feels powerful. The real question is not, why did they lose interest? The real question is, can I remain grounded without external confirmation? Because if you can, something stabilizes inside you. Worth that does not fluctuate with response time. Connection that does not depend on imbalance. Presence that does not require applause. Not everyone will stay when you stop chasing validation, but the ones who do will relate to you differently, not through insecurity, through alignment. And alignment may be quieter than validation, but it is far more stable.